My name is Julian Vance, and for most of my 42 years on this earth, my relationship with the concept of a higher power, with any notion of faith, had been complicated, to say the least. I grew up in a household where religion was a quiet, Sunday morning obligation, a set of manners rather than a matter of the heart. We went to church, we mouthed the hymns, we listened politely to sermons that often felt distant and disconnected from the vibrant, sometimes messy, reality of life. As I came into my own, particularly as I began to understand and accept my identity as a gay man, the chasm between the world I inhabited and the world described from most pulpits seemed to grow exponentially wider. The messages I heard, whether overtly condemnatory or subtly exclusionary, painted a picture of a divine that had little room, and even less love, for someone like me. So, I did what many in my shoes have done. I built my own spiritual framework, one that was more about inherent human goodness, the pursuit of authentic connection, and a kind of hopeful agnosticism. I believed in love, in kindness, in the beauty of the human spirit, but the idea of a personal, intervening deity often felt like a bridge too far, especially one that seemed so preoccupied with judgment and condemnation, as portrayed by so many of its followers. I wasn't an atheist, not truly. Deep down, there was a quiet yearning, a sense that there had to be something more, some grander design, some ultimate source of the love and beauty I saw in the world, in art, in nature, in the eyes of the people I cared for. But the traditional avenues to that something more felt barred to me, guarded by doctrines that deemed my very essence, the way I loved, as flawed or sinful. I carved out a life for myself in the city, a life filled with friends who became my chosen family, a career in graphic design that allowed me to express my creativity, and a partner, Michael, whose love was a steady, grounding force. We had built a home, a sanctuary of acceptance and mutual respect. Yet, even within that haven, even amidst the laughter and the shared dreams, there were moments, usually late at night, when a quiet disquiet would settle over me. Was this all there was? Was the love I shared, so real and profound to me, somehow lesser in the grand cosmic scheme? Were the pronouncements I'd heard from childhood, the subtle and not-so-subtle messages of my inherent unworthiness, true on some level I couldn't quite grasp or refute? I tried to push these thoughts aside, to live fully in the present, to find my spiritual nourishment in human connection, in the pursuit of justice and equality, in the simple acts of kindness that seemed to make the world a marginally better place. My faith, if you could call it that, was pinned on humanity, on our capacity for both incredible cruelty and breathtaking compassion. The divine, if it existed, felt like an absent landlord, having set the universe in motion and then stepped back to watch it unfold, indifferent to the individual dramas playing out on its vast stage. I certainly didn't believe in a heaven or hell, as traditionally depicted. The idea of eternal punishment for earthly sins, especially sins defined by who one loved, seemed utterly incompatible with any notion of a benevolent creator. My morality was rooted in empathy, in the golden rule, do unto others. It seemed a sensible, practical guide for navigating life. I wasn't actively seeking a spiritual revelation. I was, I thought, reasonably content with my understanding of the world, my place in it, and the gentle, humanistic creed I had constructed for myself. Little did I know that the foundations of my carefully built reality were about to be shattered by an experience so profound, so utterly paradigm-shifting, that it would redefine not only my understanding of the divine, but the very essence of who I was and what it meant to love. The undercurrent of spiritual searching, though often unacknowledged, was always there, a faint hum beneath the surface of my busy, outwardly fulfilling life. It manifested in my appreciation for art that reached for the transcendent, in my love for music that stirred the soul, in quiet moments of reflection where I'd ponder the big questions, only to retreat when the answers seemed too elusive or too tied to the exclusionary doctrines I'd rejected. Michael, bless his heart, was far more pragmatic, grounded in the here and now, his spirituality expressed through his unwavering loyalty and his deep capacity for joy. He respected my occasional existential musings but didn't often share them. Our life was good, built on shared values of honesty, mutual support, and a fierce commitment to living authentically in a world that wasn't always welcoming. But the echoes of those early religious messages, the ones that implied a conditional divine love, still lingered in the deeper recesses of my psyche, creating a subtle, almost imperceptible barrier to complete spiritual peace. I longed for a sense of ultimate belonging, a validation that resonated beyond the loving circle of my friends and partner, but I didn't know where or how to find it, or even if it was possible for someone like me. This quiet, internal tug-of-war, this dance between contentment and a vague, unnameable yearning, was the backdrop against which the most extraordinary event of my life was about to unfold. An event that would strip away all my intellectual defenses and plunge me into the very heart of a mystery I had long tried to keep at arm's length. The day it happened began like any other ordinary Tuesday. The city was waking up, a symphony of distant sirens, rumbling buses, and the general hum of urban life filtering through our apartment window. I remember Michael fussing over a stubborn coffee stain on his favorite tie, the scent of brewing espresso filling our small kitchen, the mundane, comforting rituals of a shared morning. I had a deadline looming for a new branding project, a local arts festival, and my mind was already sketching out color palettes and font choices as I sipped my coffee. There was nothing to suggest that this day would be anything other than a typical day, filled with its usual mix of creative challenges, minor frustrations, and the quiet contentment of a life well lived, if not perfectly understood in a spiritual sense. The weather was crisp, early autumn, and I decided to cycle to my downtown studio, a small pleasure I indulged in when the air wasn't too biting. The ride was invigorating, the city unfolding around me in its familiar, chaotic beauty, the blur of faces, the towering architecture, the snippets of conversations overheard. I felt alive, present, my earlier, more nebulous thoughts about faith and meaning receding into the background as the demands of the physical world took precedence. I arrived at the studio, exchanged pleasantries with my colleagues, and dived into my work. The morning passed in a focused blur of design software, client calls, and creative problem-solving. Lunch was a quick sandwich at my desk, my mind still wrestling with a particularly tricky logo concept. It was around mid-afternoon when the first subtle sign that something was amiss occurred. A fleeting dizziness, a slight pressure in my chest that I dismissed as indigestion from my hurried lunch, or perhaps too much caffeine. I took a few deep breaths, stretched, and tried to refocus on the screen in front of me. But the sensation didn't entirely dissipate. It lingered, a faint, uncomfortable awareness that something wasn't quite right. I tried to ignore it, to push through, attributing it to stress or fatigue. Deadlines had a way of manifesting physically, I told myself. But then, the pressure intensified, no longer subtle but a distinct, tightening band around my chest. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and the dizziness returned with a vengeance, the room starting to tilt and sway. I remember thinking, this isn't right, this is more than indigestion. I reached for my phone, a vague idea of calling Michael or perhaps 911 forming in my mind, but my hand was trembling, and a sudden, sharp, excruciating pain, like a white-hot poker, lanced through my chest and down my left arm. I gasped, the air catching in my throat. The colors on my monitor seemed to flare with an unnatural intensity, then began to blur. The sounds of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the distant chatter, receded, replaced by a roaring in my ears. Panic, cold and absolute, clawed at me. I tried to call out, to signal for help, but no sound escaped my lips. My body felt heavy, unresponsive, as if it were no longer under my control. I remember slumping forward, my head hitting the desk with a dull thud. The pain was immense, overwhelming, a crushing weight that seemed to steal my breath, my consciousness, my very being. There was a kaleidoscope of confused images, fragmented thoughts, a desperate, primal fear. Is this it? Is this how it ends? And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain vanished. The roaring in my ears subsided. The chaotic images faded. Everything went utterly, profoundly black. It was not a sleep, not unconsciousness as I had ever known it. It was an absence, a cessation, a plunge into a void so complete that it felt like the very end of existence itself. In that moment of transition, the world as I knew it, with all its joys, sorrows, and unanswered questions, simply ceased to be. The last flicker of earthly awareness was the image of my unfinished design on the computer screen, a vibrant splash of color against the encroaching, infinite darkness, a final, poignant symbol of a life interrupted, a story unfinished, or so I believed. The transition from agonizing pain to absolute nothingness was instantaneous, like a switch being flipped. One moment, my entire being was consumed by the physical torment of a body shutting down. The next, there was only silence, darkness, and an utter lack of sensation. It was not the peaceful void one might imagine. It was a void of terrifying completeness, a state where even the concept of I seemed to struggle for existence. Time, as I understood it, dissolved. There was no before, no after, just an eternal, unchanging moment of non-being. I had no thoughts, no memories, no sense of self, only this profound immersion in an infinite, featureless abyss. It felt like an eternity, though in earthly terms it might have been mere seconds. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shift began. It wasn't a return of physical senses, but a dawning awareness, a subtle flicker of consciousness within the vast emptiness. I became aware of myself, not as a body, but as a point of observation, a distinct consciousness separate from the void. With this nascent awareness came a sensation of movement, a gentle, upward drift, as if I were a bubble rising from an immeasurable depth. The oppressive weight of the blackness began to recede, replaced by a strange, ethereal lightness. And then I could perceive. Not with eyes, for I had none, but with a kind of spiritual sight. Below me, or what felt like below, was the scene I had just departed. My office, my desk, and slumped over it, a figure. My figure. I saw myself, Julian, head resting on the keyboard, my arm hanging limply, my face pale and still. Colleagues were beginning to notice, their expressions shifting from focused work to alarm, then to dawning horror as they rushed towards my inert form. I saw one of them, Sarah from accounting, her face a mask of panic as she fumbled for her phone, shouting my name. The scene unfolded with a strange, dreamlike clarity, yet I felt utterly detached from it, as if watching a play in which I had inexplicably become a spectator rather than a participant. There was no pain, no fear, only a profound, almost shocking calm. The Julian down there, the one whose heart had catastrophically failed, was no longer me. I was here, wherever here was, observing, aware. I tried to understand what was happening. Was this death? Was I a ghost, a spirit? The labels felt inadequate, too laden with earthly preconceptions to capture the reality of this disembodied state. I felt no connection to the body below, no desire to return to it. It seemed like a discarded garment, no longer necessary. As I hovered, watching the frantic efforts to revive my physical form, the arrival of paramedics, the urgent commands, the chest compressions, the atmosphere around me began to change again. The ordinary reality of the office scene started to feel thin, almost transparent. And from the periphery of my awareness, a different kind of darkness began to encroach. This wasn't the neutral void I had just experienced. This was a darkness that felt sentient. It was cold, not a physical cold, but a spiritual chill that seeped into my very essence. Shadowy, ill-defined shapes began to coalesce in this encroaching gloom, forms that writhed and shifted like smoke, yet possessed a distinct, unsettling presence. They radiated a palpable sense of despair, of emptiness, of a hunger that felt directed towards me. A primal fear, something deeper and more visceral than the panic I had felt during the heart attack, began to stir within me. These were not figures of the physical world. They felt like manifestations of negativity, of spiritual decay. Their presence was oppressive, heavy, and they seemed to be drawing closer, their shadowy tendrils reaching out. I felt an instinctive urge to flee, to recoil, but I had no means of movement, no control over my spiritual location. I was exposed, vulnerable, and a chilling sense of being utterly alone in the face of this unseen threat washed over me. The calm I had experienced earlier was rapidly eroding, replaced by a dawning terror of what might lie beyond this initial stage of disembodiment. Just as the nearest of these dark forms seemed to almost touch me, its chilling presence threatening to engulf my consciousness, a new phenomenon pierced the encroaching gloom. It started as a tiny, almost imperceptible pinprick of light in the far distance, a single point of brilliance in the oppressive, spiritual darkness. But this light was unlike any earthly illumination. It wasn't the harsh glare of the sun or the artificial glow of electricity. This light was alive. It pulsed with an incredible warmth, a gentle yet irresistible power that began to actively push back the shadows, to dispel the encroaching cold. The shadowy entities visibly recoiled, hissing and dissolving at its mere approach, their dark forms unable to withstand its pure, unblemished radiance. The light grew, expanding steadily, not in a blinding, overwhelming explosion, but in a soft, pervasive golden bloom that filled my entire awareness. It was incredibly bright, more luminous than 1,000 suns, yet it didn't hurt my spiritual eyes to perceive it. It was a light that felt like pure, unconditional love, like infinite peace, like the ultimate homecoming after a long, arduous, and painful journey. An indescribable sense of relief, so profound it felt like a physical balm to my spiritual essence, washed over me. The terror I had felt moments before dissipated instantly, completely, replaced by an incredible, overwhelming sense of safety, of belonging, and an irresistible, joyful pull towards this magnificent, beckoning presence. The chaotic scene in my office below, my abandoned body, the retreating shadowy figures, all began to fade into utter insignificance as I was drawn, gently but inexorably, joyfully, towards the very heart of this glorious, welcoming, and all-encompassing light. The light was all-encompassing, a boundless ocean of unimaginable warmth, serenity, and pure, unconditional love. As I was drawn deeper and deeper into its embrace, the last vestiges of the earthly realm, the frantic sounds of the resuscitation attempt, the distant sight of my fallen physical form, receded entirely, like a faded dream slipping from waking consciousness. There was no sensation of travel through space, no perception of distance covered, only a continuous, blissful immersion into this radiant, living presence. It wasn't merely a visual phenomenon. I could feel it with every fiber of my spiritual being, as if the light itself was composed of the very essence of pure, unadulterated love, seeping into the deepest core of my existence, gently healing spiritual wounds I hadn't even known I carried, soothing anxieties I had long suppressed. The peace was absolute, a stillness so profound, so complete, that it quieted every lingering fear, every unanswered question, every faint, residual echo of the turmoil and confusion I had left behind in the physical world. Within this incredible, pulsating luminosity, a distinct form began to coalesce, or rather, to emerge organically from the light itself, as if he were both its ultimate source and its most perfect, radiant expression. It was a figure, recognizably humanoid in shape, yet radiating a divine majesty and a gentle, overwhelming power that utterly transcended any human description or earthly comparison. His features were not sharp or easily defined in a physical sense, as if they were composed of the very light that surrounded and emanated from him, yet they conveyed an intelligence of infinite depth, a wisdom as ancient as creation itself, and a compassion so boundless, so personal, it was utterly overwhelming. His eyes, if they could be called such, in our limited understanding, seemed to hold the wisdom of all ages, the understanding of every soul's journey, and as they met my awareness, I felt seen, truly, completely seen, not just my outward actions or my carefully constructed persona, but the deepest, most hidden, most vulnerable parts of my soul. And in that all-knowing, all-encompassing gaze, there was not a trace of judgment, not a shadow of condemnation, only an infinite, unwavering, unconditional love that was more potent, more real, more transformative than anything I had ever experienced or could have ever conceived. I had no doubt, not a flicker of uncertainty, not a moment's hesitation about who stood before me. The name, the knowing, resonated in the very core of my spirit without a single word being spoken. It was him. It was the divine source, the creator, the ultimate embodiment of love itself, God. An awe so profound, so overwhelming, it was almost unbearable, washed over my entire being. I felt an instinctive, irresistible urge to bow, to prostrate myself, not out of fear or coercion, but out of an overwhelming sense of reverence, humility, and profound unworthiness in the face of such unimaginable purity, such boundless love, such absolute truth. Julian, his voice was not a sound that vibrated through any physical medium, for there was no air, no ears to hear in the conventional earthly sense. It was a direct, telepathic communication, a pure knowing, a divine thought that bloomed with perfect clarity and profound resonance directly within my consciousness. His voice was infinitely gentle, yet it carried an authority that was absolute, an authenticity that was undeniable. The sound of my own name, spoken by him, by God, felt like a sacred benediction, a loving affirmation of my very existence, a confirmation that I was known, cherished, and infinitely valued, washing away any lingering sense of insignificance or dissolution I might have felt in the void. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, a thought, a question, the nature of the experience shifted once more. The glorious light that surrounded us, his very essence, seemed to become a vast, living canvas, and upon it, with breathtaking clarity and detail, my entire earthly life began to unfold. It wasn't like watching a movie on a distant screen. It was as if I was completely immersed within the memories, reliving each moment with an added, crucial dimension of complete, objective understanding. I was simultaneously the participant and the observer, seeing not only my actions and words, but also the intricate, hidden web of my thoughts, my feelings, my motivations, my intentions, and, crucially, the impact of my life on everyone I had ever encountered. Every moment, from my earliest childhood memories, the innocent joys, the formative experiences, the scraped knees, the first stirrings of independent thought and conscience, to my final, gasping moments before my heart gave out in that sunlit office, was replayed with perfect, unsparing fidelity. I saw myself as a child, navigating the complexities of family and school, shaped by both the love I received and the hurts I endured. I witnessed the confusing, often painful, journey of adolescence, the dawning awareness of my identity as a gay man, the fear, the secrecy, the tentative steps towards self-acceptance, in a world that often seemed hostile or indifferent. I saw my adult life, the pursuit of my career, the joy of creativity, the forging of deep friendships that became my chosen family, the precious, loving relationship with Michael, a beacon of stability and acceptance in my life. I saw the good I had done, the times I had acted with kindness, with integrity, with courage. There were moments of unexpected generosity, of selfless support for friends in need, of quiet acts of creativity that brought beauty or insight to others. These moments, replayed in this divine light, brought a surprising warmth, a quiet affirmation of the good I had managed to achieve. But the life review was unflinchingly, though never cruelly, honest. It also showed me, with equal clarity, the other side of the ledger, the moments I was deeply ashamed of, the times I had fallen short of my own ideals, of the divine potential within me. I saw my fears, my insecurities, the times my ego had driven my actions. I saw the opportunities for greater love, for deeper compassion, for bolder acts of kindness that I had missed due to selfishness, distraction, or a failure of courage. I saw the subtle ways I had sometimes judged others, even as I railed against the judgment I had experienced myself. I saw the moments I had allowed bitterness or resentment to fester, poisoning my own spirit and affecting my relationships. The focus of this panoramic review was never on condemnation or punishment. There was no accusatory finger-pointing, no tallying of sins for some future retribution. Instead, the entire process was imbued with an overwhelming sense of divine love and a profound desire for my learning, my growth, my ultimate understanding. The central divine figure, God, remained present throughout this entire, deeply intimate reliving of my life. His love, an unwavering, unconditional, palpable constant, even as I cringed internally at some of the more painful revelations about my own failings and shortcomings. It was like being shown a complete, transparent spiritual inventory, not for the purpose of shaming me, but for the sake of profound, liberating, transformative understanding. Crucially, the life review didn't just show my actions and motivations. It allowed me to directly experience the impact of my life, my words, my choices, on the feelings and lives of others. I felt the joy I had brought to a friend with a thoughtful gesture. I felt the pain my careless words had inflicted on a sensitive soul. I felt the ripple effects of both my kindnesses and my unkindnesses as they spread outwards into the intricate web of human relationship. It was an overwhelming, humbling, and profoundly illuminating immersion into the interconnectedness of all life, a direct, irrefutable experience of the truth that we are all one, and that what we do to others, we are, in a very real sense, ultimately doing to ourselves and to the divine. And through it all, his loving, compassionate presence was there, a silent, patient, all-knowing witness, allowing me to see myself my entire life as I truly was, in the pure, unfiltered, and ultimately infinitely merciful light of his eternal truth. The life review continued, peeling back layer after layer of my carefully constructed self-image, my ingrained habits of thought, and my often unexamined motivations, delving deeper, not just into my outward actions, but into the very fabric of my beliefs and the true, often hidden state of my soul. It was an unsparing, yet always profoundly compassionate examination, like a divine master surgeon carefully and lovingly excising all that was not aligned with ultimate love and eternal truth from my spiritual being. I saw myself in moments of significant moral compromise, not necessarily acts of overt malice, but times when the subtle pressures of societal expectation, the desire for acceptance, or the fear of confrontation had led me to remain silent in the face of injustice, or to participate even passively in systems or attitudes that I knew in my heart were wrong or harmful. I witnessed the insidious ways in which the internalized homophobia I had absorbed from a condemning society had sometimes manifested as self-doubt, as a reluctance to fully embrace my own worthiness, or even, on rare, regrettable occasions, as a projection of that negativity onto others within my own community. These were not necessarily conscious cruelties, but instances of looking the other way when I could have spoken up, of choosing the easier path of conformity over the more challenging one of authentic integrity, of allowing the pervasive negativity of a judgmental world to subtly chip away at my own core sense of divine self-worth and inherent goodness. The review then highlighted, with gentle but piercing clarity, my interactions with those who held different beliefs, particularly those whose religious views had often made me feel excluded or condemned. I saw not only my pain and anger in response to their judgment, but also the times when I, in turn, had reacted with my own form of judgment, with sarcasm, with dismissal, or with a refusal to see the shared humanity beneath the differing doctrines. From this new, elevated, divine vantage point, the stark us versus them mentality that had sometimes characterized my response to religious intolerance dissolved into a profound and sorrowful understanding of our shared human fallibility, our collective wounding, and the tragic ways in which fear and misunderstanding can distort even the most sacred truths. His divine presence beside me was a constant, unwavering source of unutterable love and acceptance. Yet this love did not shield me from the acute, purifying pain of these profound realizations. It was a healing pain, born not of condemnation from him, for there was none, but of my own dawning, clear-sighted understanding of where I had fallen short of the boundless divine potential for love and wisdom that resided within me, as it resides within every soul. He was patiently, lovingly showing me the unvarnished truth of my own heart, the hidden, often unconscious, places where fear had masqueraded as self-protection, where righteous anger had sometimes hardened into bitter resentment, or where a wounded spirit had unconsciously closed itself off from the possibility of deeper connection and greater compassion, even with those who had caused hurt. Then, the focus of the life review shifted subtly, yet profoundly, to my spiritual life, or more accurately, to the often unacknowledged spiritual hunger and the profound lack of genuine, conscious connection with the divine that had characterized much of my earthly existence. I saw the countless missed opportunities for deeper spiritual seeking, for moments of quiet contemplation, for genuine communion with Him. My attempts at prayer, I saw with a pang of regret, had been infrequent, often superficial, more like vague yearnings or desperate pleas in times of trouble, rather than a consistent, heartfelt desire for His presence, His wisdom, His guidance, or simply the joy of loving companionship with the source of my being. The vague, humanistic spirituality I had crafted for myself, while sincere in its intentions, was revealed as lacking a deep, personal, transformative connection with the living divine. It was more an intellectual construct, a philosophical preference, than a lived, experiential reality. The central divine figure, God, then began to impart specific, life-altering revelations, not through complex theological arguments or didactic pronouncements, but through a direct, loving infusion of pure understanding, a transmission of divine knowledge that bypassed my limited human intellect and resonated with irrefutable truth deep within my awakened soul. He showed me the true, universal nature of faith, not as an intellectual assent to a specific set of doctrines, nor as a tribal affiliation with a particular religious institution or creed, but as a living, breathing, dynamic, and intensely personal relationship with Him, the loving Creator of all. It was revealed as a continuous, conscious turning of the heart towards infinite love, eternal truth, and boundless compassion, a moment-by-moment choosing of light over shadow, of unity over separation. He revealed with breathtaking, liberating clarity that His primary concern, His deepest desire, was not with my adherence to any specific human-made religious code, not with my sexual orientation, not with my worldly successes or failures, but purely and simply with the fundamental vibrational condition of my soul, with the quantum of authentic, unconditional love I had managed to cultivate within myself and genuinely share with others during my precious fleeting earthly sojourn. Julian. His divine communication was infinitely gentle, yet carried an undeniable and profoundly transformative weight of ultimate truth. The identity you embraced, the love you shared, the societal labels you wore, these were all part of the specific tapestry, the unique circumstances and trials of your earthly life. They provided the rich context for your soul's learning and growth. But the true, eternal journey, the one that truly, ultimately matters in the grand scheme of existence, was always being waged silently, sacredly, within the sanctuary of your own heart, the constant, moment-to-moment choice between expansive, unconditional love and constricting, isolating fear, between selfless, healing compassion and self-centered indifference, between consciously, actively seeking my eternal light and guidance, or passively, unconsciously dwelling in the obscuring shadows of limited human understanding, societal conditioning, and egoic illusion. Visions then began to unfold with an almost holographic clarity and emotional immediacy, illustrating these profound spiritual truths. I saw souls from every conceivable walk of life, from every culture, every era, every belief system, who had lived outwardly simple, even obscure and unnoticed lives. Individuals who had perhaps never set foot in a formal place of worship or subscribed to any particular creed, yet they radiated a brilliant, dazzling internal light, a spiritual luminescence that was breathtaking to behold, because their hearts were genuinely overflowing with pure, selfless love, authentic humility, profound kindness, and selfless compassion for all beings. Conversely, and with equal clarity, I saw others who had held positions of great earthly power, immense wealth, widespread influence, and even high religious authority. Individuals who were outwardly respected, revered, perhaps even idolized by many, yet their spiritual forms, when viewed through his eyes, appeared dim, constricted, heavy, and burdened by the invisible weight of unacknowledged pride, pervasive spiritual arrogance, deep-seated fear, and a tragic, profound lack of genuine, heartfelt compassion for their fellow beings, especially for those they deemed lesser or other. It was a radical, stunning, and complete reordering of my entire understanding of true worth, ultimate value, and genuine spiritual importance. The deeply ingrained values of the world I had known, social status, material wealth, professional achievement, intellectual prowess, physical attractiveness, even adherence to societal norms of sexuality and relationship, all seemed to fade into utter, almost laughable insignificance when compared to the simple, luminous, eternal truth of a genuinely loving, humble, kind, and compassionate heart. He showed me, with an unequivocal certainty that banished all previous doubts and fears, that every single soul, without any exception whatsoever, was infinitely precious to him, cherished beyond human comprehension, an integral and irreplaceable part of his own divine being, regardless of their nationality, their creed, their race, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their social standing, or any of the myriad other labels and categories that humans so readily use to divide, judge, and harm one another. This specific revelation, concerning the unconditional divine acceptance of my own identity as a gay man and the sacredness of the love I had shared, was particularly staggering, profoundly healing, and deeply, joyously liberating for me. It directly contradicted so much of the painful, exclusionary religious messaging I had internalized over the years. The life review, I finally completely understood, wasn't a judgment in the punitive, fear-based human sense of the word at all. It was far more akin to a divine, loving diagnostic, a gentle, honest, and meticulously thorough spiritual assessment designed to facilitate profound soul growth, deep emotional healing, and ultimate, liberating understanding. The overwhelming waves of regret and sorrow I experienced were not imposed upon me by him as a punishment. They arose naturally, spontaneously, from my own newfound piercing clarity, from vividly seeing the often painful chasm between what I had been in my earthly ignorance and fear, and what I could have been, had I lived more consistently in closer alignment with his infinite love, his boundless wisdom, and his gentle guidance. His divine purpose was not to shame or diminish me in any way, but to awaken me fully, to purify my understanding, to heal my past wounds, and to prepare me for a deeper, more complete, and infinitely joyful understanding of the eternal spiritual realities that underpinned all existence. And as this profoundly illuminating and deeply transformative phase of the life review concluded, I felt utterly stripped bare of all pretense, all egoic defense, all illusion, yet simultaneously, paradoxically, incredibly hopeful, profoundly receptive, and deeply, unshakably ready to receive whatever further truths he, in his infinite, overflowing mercy and boundless love, wished to impart to my waiting, eager, and now truly open soul. The immensity of the divine light seemed to deepen further, to become even more vibrant and alive, and with this intensification, my capacity for understanding continued to expand exponentially. as if my very consciousness was being gently, lovingly stretched to accommodate divine truths and perspectives too vast, too beautiful, too liberating for my former earthly mind to have ever contained. The central divine figure, God, began to unveil with even greater clarity the intricate, often hidden, spiritual realities that lay behind the frequently deceptive curtain of the physical world. This was no longer just about my personal life review. This was about the fundamental nature of existence, the purpose of life, and the divine laws that govern the cosmos. He showed me, with a clarity that was both breathtaking and humbling, that the universe itself is a manifestation of divine love, a vast, intricate, and infinitely creative expression of His own being. Every atom, every star, every living creature, from the smallest microbe to the largest galaxy, was imbued with His presence, a spark of His consciousness, a note in His divine symphony. The purpose of creation, He revealed, was for souls like mine, like everyone's, to experience individuality, to make choices, to learn, to grow, and ultimately, to consciously return to a state of loving, joyful union with Him, the source of all. Earthly life, with all its challenges, its sorrows, and its fleeting joys, was presented not as a random series of events, nor as a place of punishment, but as a precious, sacred schoolroom for the soul, a divinely designed environment offering myriad opportunities for spiritual evolution through the lessons of love, compassion, forgiveness, patience, and wisdom. He then addressed the shocking revelation I had been anticipating, though it came not with a thunderclap of judgment, but with an overwhelming wave of pure, unconditional, divine acceptance that washed away decades of internalized shame, fear, and religious wounding. He showed me, with undeniable, soul-deep clarity, that my identity as a gay man, the way I loved, the very essence of my being, was not a mistake, not a sin, not a deviation from His plan, but an integral, beautiful, and divinely intended part of who I was created to be. Visions unfolded, where He highlighted the love Michael and I had shared. He didn't focus on the societal labels or the condemnations of certain human doctrines. Instead, He showed me the purity of our connection, the loyalty, the tenderness, the mutual support, the shared laughter, the comfort we had provided each other. He illuminated these as expressions of divine love in human form. Julian. His communication was imbued with an infinite tenderness. The love you shared, the love you felt, in its authenticity and sincerity, was a reflection of my love. I do not create souls to be condemned for who they are, or for who they love with a pure heart. The judgments and divisions you experienced in your world are born of human fear, of misunderstanding, of doctrines created in ignorance of my true, boundless nature. My love knows no gender, no orientation, no human-made category. It seeks only the open heart, the willing spirit. This revelation was like a dam breaking within me. The years of subtle and overt messages that I was somehow less than, or disordered, or an abomination in the eyes of God, crumbled into dust in the face of this overwhelming divine affirmation. Tears, not of sorrow this time, but of profound, unimaginable relief and ecstatic joy, streamed from my spiritual eyes. He showed me how many earthly religions, in their sincere but often flawed attempts to understand and articulate the divine, had become entangled in human ego, in power structures, in cultural biases, and in fear-based interpretations of sacred texts. He revealed that many doctrines which caused division, condemnation, and suffering were not of His true spirit, but were distortions, veils that obscured His simple, universal message of unconditional love and acceptance for all His children, the core of all true spirituality, Julian. He continued, his light seeming to embrace me even more fully, is love. Love for me, love for yourself, as my beloved creation, and love for all others, without condition, without exception. Any teaching, any doctrine, any religious practice that leads to judgment, to exclusion, to hatred, or to the diminishment of another soul is not aligned with my heart, regardless of how ancient its tradition or how fervent its followers. He showed me that my spiritual journey, my yearning for connection, even my rejection of exclusionary religious forms, had all been part of my path, guided by an inner wisdom that sought authenticity. He affirmed that the love I had given and received in my life, in all its forms, was sacred, a participation in the divine dance of creation. This was not just an absolution, it was a profound validation, a divine anointing of my very being. The shocking part was not that God might be tolerant, but that his love was so radically inclusive, so utterly beyond human prejudice, that it rendered all human judgments about who is worthy of love utterly meaningless. He wasn't just okay with me being gay. He had created me as I was, and he cherished the love I was capable of giving and receiving in all its unique expression. This understanding was like a spiritual rebirth, a complete recalibration of my soul's compass. The burden of shame I had carried, often unconsciously for so long, simply dissolved in the radiant light of his perfect, unconditional love. I was free, not just from physical death, but from a lifetime of spiritual constriction. The dialogue with the central divine figure, God, deepened, moving beyond my personal life and identity to encompass broader spiritual truths essential for human understanding and evolution. His revelations were not delivered as a lecture, but as an experiential immersion, where understanding bloomed within me, complete and irrefutable, often accompanied by vivid, symbolic visions that illustrated these profound concepts. He began to speak of the true nature of sin, a word that had often been used to condemn and control. He revealed that sin, from his divine perspective, was not primarily about breaking arbitrary rules or offending a judgmental deity. Rather, sin, in its deepest sense, was anything that created separation from him, separation from one's own true divine self, and separation from other souls. It was the acting out of fear, ignorance, selfishness, and a lack of love. The rules or moral guidelines found in sacred traditions, he explained, were originally intended as loving signposts, gentle guardrails to help souls navigate the complexities of earthly existence and avoid actions that would lead to suffering and spiritual disconnection. However, he showed how these guidelines had often been misinterpreted, rigidified into harsh laws, and used by human institutions to wield power, inspire fear, and create divisions, rather than to foster love, understanding, and unity. My desire, Julian, his communication flowed like a river of light into my consciousness, is not for blind obedience to external rules, but for the cultivation of an inner moral compass, a heart so attuned to my love, that your choices naturally align with the principles of kindness, compassion, justice, and truth. When you act from a place of love, you are inherently aligned with my will, for I am love. He then addressed the concept of judgment and the afterlife, areas often shrouded in fear and misconception. He showed me that there was no angry, vindictive God waiting to punish souls for their earthly transgressions. The judgment that occurs after physical death, as I had begun to experience in my own life review, was primarily a process of self-realization, of seeing one's life, one's choices, and their consequences with perfect, unveiled clarity, in the illuminating presence of divine love. The pain experienced was not a punishment inflicted from without, but the intrinsic sorrow and regret that arises from understanding where one had missed opportunities to love, to grow, to be true to one's divine potential. He showed me various spiritual realms, or states of being, that souls migrate to after death, not as fixed, eternal heavens or hells assigned by him, but as vibrational realities that naturally corresponded to the soul's own level of spiritual evolution, its accumulated love, wisdom, and awareness. Souls were not sent to these places. They were drawn to them by a kind of spiritual gravity, gravitating towards environments that resonated with their inner state. The realms of darkness and suffering he showed me were not places of divine retribution, but states of profound spiritual ignorance, isolation, and an addiction to negative patterns of thought and emotion, where souls, still caught in the illusions of separation and fear, continued to create their own painful realities. Yet, even in the deepest of these shadows, his light and his love were ever present, always offering a path towards healing and return should a soul choose to seek it. There was no eternal damnation in the sense of a soul being forever abandoned or tortured by God. The hells were largely self-created and self-perpetuated, though the influence of less evolved spiritual entities could exacerbate the suffering. His mercy, he revealed, was infinite, and the opportunity for growth and return to the light was never ultimately withdrawn from any soul. Though the journey back from deep spiritual darkness could be long and arduous, requiring sincere repentance, which he defined as a profound change of heart and mind, and a genuine desire for transformation. Conversely, the realms of light, often called heaven, were states of being characterized by overwhelming love, joy, peace, beauty, and a continuous, ecstatic communion with him and with other souls who vibrated at a similar frequency of love and wisdom. These were not static paradises of idle repose, but dynamic environments of continued learning, service, creative expression, and ever-expanding spiritual growth, where souls joyfully participated in the ongoing unfolding of his divine plan. He emphasized that the journey of the soul was eternal, and physical death was merely a transition, a shedding of a temporary earthly garment, not an end. The purpose of all experience, in every realm, was ultimately spiritual evolution, the gradual awakening to one's true divine nature, and the return to conscious, joyful oneness with the divine source. The mission he was giving me, he clarified, was not to create a new religion or to condemn existing ones wholesale, but to bear witness to the universality of his love, to challenge the fear-based, exclusionary doctrines that had caused so much pain and division, and to remind humanity of the simple, core truths that lay at the heart of all authentic spiritual paths. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. His revelations were dismantling a lifetime of preconceived notions, not just about my own identity, but about the very nature of God, spirituality, and the afterlife. It was a profound unlearning, a joyful liberation from the shackles of fear and dogma, and an awakening to a spiritual reality far more vast, loving, and hopeful than I had ever dared to imagine. The central divine figure, God, then gently but firmly conveyed that my time in this realm of ineffable light and direct, unfiltered understanding was drawing to its appointed close. An immediate, almost visceral sense of profound reluctance, a deep, aching sorrow, welled up within my spiritual consciousness. Having been immersed in this sublime state of absolute peace, unconditional love, and perfect luminous clarity, the mere thought of returning to the dense, often chaotic, and spiritually shadowed world I had left behind, with its pervasive pain, its frustrating limitations, its veils of illusion, and its relentless, often bewildering demands, felt almost unbearable, like being asked to willingly exchange a state of ecstatic bliss for one of certain suffering. I want to stay here with you. The thought, the desperate, silent plea, formed with an almost physical ache within the core of my being, a passionate, soul-deep yearning to remain forever in his healing, illuminating, all-loving presence, to never again be separated from this state of perfect grace and communion. His divine response was filled with an infinitely tender, compassionate understanding that fully acknowledged the depth and sincerity of my desire, yet simultaneously, lovingly, affirmed a different, necessary path for me at this crucial juncture of my eternal soul's journey. Julian, my beloved child. His communication was like a soothing balm, yet carried an undeniable, gentle authority. Your sacred, chosen journey in the physical realm, with its unique, invaluable lessons, and its specific opportunities for soul growth and service, is not yet fully complete. There is still vital work for you to do there, a crucial healing message of my unconditional love and universal acceptance that you must now carry back with you, like a precious, living flame into the darkness. The profound peace, the boundless love, the liberating truth you have experienced here are not meant to be hoarded selfishly, kept only for your own solace, but to be generously, courageously shared. They are to become a living beacon of hope, a guiding light for other souls who are still lost, stumbling in the spiritual confusion and emotional darkness of your world, yearning, often unknowingly, for the very light, the very love you have now so fully witnessed and embraced. He then showed me, not with the exhaustive detail of the life review, but through a series of gentle, prescient, symbolic flashes of insight, the potential positive, healing ripples, the unforeseen, grace-filled pathways of service and connection that my return to earthly life could initiate if I chose to align myself with His will. He showed me glimpses of faces I did not yet know in my earthly life, souls who were struggling with loneliness, with fear, with self-rejection. Particularly, others within the LGBTQ+ community who felt deeply wounded or alienated by traditional religious condemnation. He showed me how my story, my authentic testimony of His unconditional love, could touch their hearts, challenge their despair, and offer them a lifeline of hope, a pathway back to a sense of spiritual belonging and divine acceptance. He helped me understand, with profound clarity, that even a single, small, flickering light, if carried faithfully, courageously, and shared authentically, could dispel an astonishing, disproportionate amount of darkness in the world, far more than one might logically imagine from a limited, purely human perspective. The intense, almost overwhelming reluctance I had initially felt at the daunting thought of returning began to slowly, subtly transform. First, it shifted into a hesitant, almost mournful acceptance of His divine wisdom, and then, gradually, as the vision of potential service unfolded, it blossomed into a burgeoning, powerful sense of sacred resolve, a deep, inner commitment to the task ahead. The mission He was entrusting to me, I began to realize, with growing conviction, was not a burdensome chore to be endured, but an incredible, almost unimaginable honor, a sacred, joyful privilege, a direct continuation of divine service on a far higher, more spiritually significant and impactful plane than I had ever conceived possible during my previous earthly existence. You will not be alone in this challenging, often misunderstood endeavor. He assured me with infinite tenderness, His divine love a tangible, empowering force that enveloped, strengthened, and reassured my entire spiritual being. I will be with you always, in every moment, in every trial, even unto the end of the age of separation. When you speak my truth with sincerity, humility, and love, my spirit will indeed speak through you, imbuing your words with a power and a wisdom beyond your own. The strength you will need for every perceived obstacle, the divine wisdom for every difficult decision, the precise words of healing and encouragement for every human encounter will be unfailingly provided to you, moment by moment, as you need them. The path forward will be made clear before you, one sure, grace-filled step at a time. Trust in me. Trust in my love for you and for all. Then came the gentle but inexorable, unmistakable pull, a palpable sensation of being lovingly drawn back, away from the ineffable, radiant heart of the divine light. It wasn't a forceful expulsion or a sudden, jarring banishment from paradise, but a tender, almost reluctant, divine release, like a loving parent gently guiding a child towards a necessary, though perhaps initially resisted, next step on their journey. The overwhelming, immediate brilliance of His manifest presence began to slowly recede from my direct perception, not diminishing in its intrinsic power or glory, but subtly shifting its mode of manifestation, becoming less of an external, all-consuming phenomenon, and more of an internalized, ever-abiding, guiding light within the very core of my transformed soul. The profound peace, the unconditional love, the unshakable clarity of divine truth, these precious gifts remained, etched forever, luminously, into the very fabric of my spiritual DNA, an indelible, eternal imprint that I knew with absolute, joyful certainty would never, ever leave me, no matter what challenges awaited my return. My last conscious perception in that transcendent realm, as the final, gentle veils of earthly consciousness began to lovingly descend, was his voice, his knowing, his eternal, loving promise, echoing like a divine, celestial symphony within the deepest, most sacred chambers of my renewed, commissioned spirit. Go now in peace, my beloved Julian, my precious child, and be an unwavering, courageous bearer of my inclusive, unconditional light to a world that so desperately, so achingly needs its healing illumination. Remember all that you have learned here, all that you have seen, all that you have felt in my presence. Love without limit, forgive without hesitation, accept without judgment. Serve without expectation of earthly reward, for in so doing, you not only heal others, you heal yourself, and you truly, joyfully serve me. The transition back to physical existence was not a gentle reawakening, but a shocking, violent, almost brutal collision with the dense, painful reality of the material world. One moment I was enveloped in ineffable, transcendent light, immersed in the boundless ocean of unconditional divine love. The next, an agonizing explosion of overwhelming sensation. My chest felt as if it were being simultaneously crushed by an immense, invisible weight and ripped apart from within by 1,000 burning needles. A desperate, rasping gasp, the first tortured breath of a painful, reluctant rebirth into the confines of flesh, tore through my throat, raw, ragged, and utterly insufficient. The world around me erupted in a bewildering, disorienting cacophony of harsh, metallic sounds, urgent, strained, disembodied shouts, and a blinding, chaotic, flickering artificial light, the frantic, almost desperate reality of a medical resuscitation attempt in progress. I could hear those shouts, muffled and distorted at first, then growing alarmingly clearer, voices laced with a mixture of intense professional concentration and dawning, almost disbelieving hope. "We've got a rhythm. Sinus tack. Get that airway secured now." Strong, urgent, almost rough hands were on me, probing, pressing, manipulating my unresponsive form. A gritty, suffocating oxygen mask was clamped unceremoniously over my face, the smell of antiseptic, stale sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of blood filling my nostrils with a nauseating, unwelcome familiarity. My body, so recently free and weightless, was now a symphony of excruciating, unrelenting pain. My chest, where the catastrophic cardiac event had occurred, felt like a molten inferno of agony. My limbs were heavy, leaden, unresponsive. Every nerve ending in my battered, traumatized physical form seemed to be screaming in raw, unadulterated protest against this unwelcome return to suffering. It was a brutal, shocking, almost cruel re-entry into a world I had, for a timeless, blessed, unforgettable interval, completely, blissfully transcended. Consciousness flickered precariously, a fragile, sputtering flame buffeted by a relentless storm of pain, sensory overload, and profound disorientation. Through vision that swam and blurred, distorted by the harsh glare of overhead lights, I saw indistinct, masked faces hovering anxiously above me. Paramedics, nurses, doctors, their expressions a tense, unreadable mask of intense professional focus, tinged with a dawning, almost incredulous astonishment that eerily mirrored my own internal shock and disbelief at being back. I tried to speak, to articulate the incredible, world-shattering, paradigm-destroying experience I had just undergone, to tell them where I had been, who I had seen, the life-altering message I now carried within the deepest recesses of my soul, but only a choked, inarticulate, pitiful groan managed to escape my unresponsive lips. The contrast was staggering, almost unbearable, capable of shattering a lesser resolve or a more fragile spirit. From the boundless, indescribable peace and infinite, unconditional love of his divine, welcoming presence, I had been unceremoniously hurled back into this raw, brutal, confining reality of a broken, tormented body and the unrelenting, often savage, chaos of the mortal world. Yet, beneath the overwhelming, crashing waves of physical pain, beneath the disorienting, suffocating fog of confusion and trauma, the indelible, luminous imprint of that other, higher, truer realm remained, a deep, quiet, unshakable certainty, an unassailable, sacred knowing. I was back, not by accident, not by mere medical chance. I was back. And I had a message, a sacred, life-transforming mission from the very heart of divine love itself. The journey from my office floor, through the wailing sirens of the ambulance, to the sterile, impersonal environment of the emergency room, and then, after a period of critical stabilization, to the intensive care unit, was a protracted, agonizing blur of searing physical pain, powerful medication-induced haziness, and fragmented, yet intensely vivid, luminous memories of the light and his loving presence. My body was undeniably broken, a shattered, malfunctioning vessel, but my spirit, though still reeling from the profound, almost violent whiplash of transitioning between such vastly different realms of existence, felt strangely, miraculously, whole, renewed, peaceful, and imbued with a serene, unshakable sense of divine purpose that somehow transcended, and even seemed to diminish, my immediate, excruciating physical suffering. The attending physicians, a team of highly skilled and dedicated medical professionals, repeatedly, almost reverently, called my survival a genuine miracle, shaking their heads in collective disbelief as they reviewed my charts. I had been clinically dead for a significant period. They informed me later with hushed voices, my cardiac arrest catastrophic, my initial prognosis for survival, let alone recovery without severe neurological impairment, virtually nil by all normal medical standards. They spoke with a mixture of scientific bafflement and quiet awe of lucky coincidences, of the remarkably rapid and effective CPR administered by my colleagues, of the unexpected, almost inexplicable resilience of the human body when pushed far beyond its generally accepted limits. I listened to their earnest, well-intentioned explanations, nodded politely, feigned understanding, but I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest, most sacred core of my being, that the true, ultimate explanation for my improbable return to life lay far beyond the grasp of conventional medical science, rooted firmly in a profound, divine mercy and a sacred, specific purpose that I was only just beginning to consciously comprehend and emotionally embrace. Michael, my beloved partner, his handsome face, a heart-wrenching mask of profound, sleepless anguish, tear-streaked exhaustion, and overwhelming, incredulous relief, was by my side as soon as they allowed visitors into the ICU. Holding his trembling hand, feeling its familiar, comforting warmth, seeing the unconditional love, the fierce protectiveness, and the lingering, terrified fear in his weary, bloodshot eyes, powerfully, poignantly grounded me in the precious, fragile reality of the earthly life I had been so unexpectedly, so miraculously, so purposefully given back. But the question loomed, immense, daunting, almost terrifying in its implications. How could I ever begin to adequately, authentically explain to him, my pragmatic, down-to-earth Michael, or to anyone else for that matter, what had truly, undeniably happened to me in that other realm? How could I possibly articulate in mere human words an experience so profound, so sacred, so utterly beyond the scope of ordinary human language, perception, and comprehension? The initial days and weeks of my recovery were an intense, multifaceted, and often overwhelming struggle, not just with the demanding, painful process of physical healing from a major cardiac event and the subsequent medical interventions, but also with the immense, almost Herculean, spiritual, and psychological task of integrating the NDE, with all its paradigm-shattering, life-altering revelations, into my conscious understanding, my emotional landscape, and my ongoing, now irrevocably changed, earthly existence. The memories of that other, luminous realm were incredibly vivid, intensely real, almost more tangible and substantial than the sterile, beeping reality of the hospital room that surrounded me. Yet, trying to describe them, to capture their essence in the clumsy net of human language, felt like a futile, almost profane, deeply frustrating attempt to bottle an infinite ocean of pure, living sunlight in a tiny, fragile earthen jar. The world around me, the hushed, efficient routines of the hospital, the concerned, kind faces of nurses and doctors, even the profound, unwavering love emanating from Michael and my closest friends, seemed strangely muted, almost two-dimensional, lacking the vibrant, pulsating, multi-dimensional aliveness, the sheer, ecstatic joy I had so recently, so unforgettably witnessed and been an integral, blissful part of. When I felt a modicum of physical strength finally return, when the heavy, disorienting fog of potent painkillers began to lift, even slightly, I knew I had to try to speak about it. First and foremost to Michael, my rock, my love, my most trusted confidant. I fumbled for words, my voice still hoarse, weak, and thick with unshed tears, and overwhelming, uncontainable emotion. I recounted, as best I could, the terrifying out-of-body experience, the menacing, oppressive darkness, the sudden, glorious, all-consuming advent of the light, the indescribable, transformative encounter with Him, with God, the panoramic, soul-searching, ultimately healing life review, and the profound, world-altering, joyously liberating revelations He had shared about the true nature of unconditional love, the illusory nature of human judgment, the sacred interconnectedness of all life, and, most personally and profoundly, the divine acceptance and inherent goodness of my own being, my own love, just as I was. He listened with rapt, unwavering, almost breathless attention, his hand never leaving mine, his expressive face a complex, shifting tapestry of bewilderment, deep concern, burgeoning understanding, and a dawning, palpable sense of awe and wonder. He didn't once interrupt, didn't once dismiss my faltering words as mere delusion, post-traumatic hallucination, or oxygen-deprived fantasy. He knew me too well, knew my inherent rationality, knew I wasn't prone to emotional exaggeration or flights of spiritual fancy. He saw the profound, undeniable, irreversible change in my eyes, in the very essence of my demeanor, in the quiet, serene peace that now seemed to radiate from me despite my physical weakness and pain. "Julian," he whispered, when I finally, exhausted but exhilarated, fell silent, his own voice trembling with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. "Whatever happened to you, whatever you saw, whatever you experienced, it was real, wasn't it? I can see it in you. You're different." His quiet, courageous, unwavering acceptance, his willingness to believe in the unbelievable, was a healing balm to my wounded soul, a crucial, validating, empowering first step on a long, uncertain, but now divinely illuminated journey. Sharing my extraordinary experience with others, especially with my more skeptical, secular friends, and my bewildered, though generally supportive, family members, proved to be far more challenging, often fraught with misunderstanding and gentle, well-intentioned disbelief. These were good, kind people, grounded in the tangible, material realities of everyday life. An NDE, a personal encounter with God, a divine message about unconditional love and the afterlife, it was simply too far outside their established, rational frames of reference. They listened, most of them, with a sort of polite, concerned, uncomfortable patience. They attributed my experience, with varying degrees of explicitness, to the well-documented psychological and physiological effects of severe physical trauma, to the known consequences of temporary oxygen deprivation to the brain during my clinical death, to the mind's powerful, almost magical capacity to play elaborate tricks on itself when under extreme, life-threatening duress. I didn't argue with them. I couldn't. I understood their perspective all too well. I had, until very, very recently, shared it myself. But their gentle, well-intentioned, sometimes pitying disbelief, their attempts to pathologize or explain away what I knew to be the most real and transformative experience of my entire existence, underscored the immense, daunting difficulty of the sacred mission he had apparently, miraculously, entrusted to me. How could I effectively, persuasively convey a divine truth so profound, so personal, so utterly paradigm-shattering, that it arguably had to be directly, experientially encountered to be fully, truly, life-alteringly understood and embraced? The few religious acquaintances I cautiously approached, hoping for some understanding or theological context, often reacted with their own forms of consternation, either trying to force my experience into the narrow, pre-existing boxes of their particular dogma, or, in some cases, subtly suggesting that such direct personal revelations were suspect, perhaps even spiritually dangerous if they didn't align perfectly with established church teachings, especially concerning my sexuality. My own internal conflict, though greatly assuaged by God's direct, loving affirmation, still echoed with the years of societal and religious conditioning. The old, ingrained identity of Julian Vance, successful graphic designer, urbane gay man, spiritual but not religious, a pragmatic humanist, was now being fundamentally challenged, expanded, and ultimately reshaped by this profound, undeniable, ongoing spiritual awakening. The comfortable, somewhat cynical, intellectual detachment I had cultivated as a defense mechanism was being replaced by a raw, vulnerable, yet incredibly powerful sense of direct, personal connection to the divine. How could I possibly reconcile the articulate, somewhat world-weary man I had been with the nascent, often tongue-tied, messenger of divine, unconditional love I was now clearly, unequivocally called to become? The once strong, almost exclusive focus on my career, on worldly achievements, on the pursuit of personal happiness, had completely faded. Not out of a sense of pious renunciation or a sudden disinterest in life, but out of a profound, irreversible shift in perspective, a reordering of priorities. The mission he had entrusted to me, the sharing of his boundless, inclusive love, now felt like the only thing that truly mattered, the only pursuit worthy of the precious, extended gift of life I had been given. My physical recovery continued, slow, painful, arduous at times, punctuated by moments of frustrating weakness and lingering discomfort. But with each passing day, as my broken physical body painstakingly mended, my spiritual resolve, my sense of divine purpose, my inner peace, strengthened and clarified exponentially. I replayed his words, his loving presence, his illuminating, life-altering revelations, over and over again, in the quiet sanctuary of my mind, like a precious, multifaceted jewel, examining each facet, seeking to understand their deepest, most nuanced meaning, striving to prepare myself spiritually, emotionally, and even intellectually for the daunting, yet exhilarating, task that lay ahead. The world outside the confines of my recovery, when I was finally able to fully re-engage with it, seemed dramatically different, or rather, I perceived it with entirely new, divinely sensitized eyes. I saw the hidden, often unacknowledged, pain and the pervasive, corrosive fear in people's eyes, more clearly, more compassionately than ever before. But I also saw, with an equal, breathtaking clarity, their immense, often untapped, inherent potential for profound love, their deep, unconscious, desperate yearning for genuine, authentic connection with each other, and with the divine source of all being. The message he had given me, the urgent, vital, healing message about courageously laying down the insidious, self-sabotaging weapons of the heart, about consciously, consistently choosing expansive love over constricting fear, divine compassion over human judgment, and about joyfully recognizing and celebrating our shared, inherent, luminous divinity, burned within my soul like a holy, inextinguishable guiding fire. I knew with an unshakable, soul-deep conviction that transcended all doubt, all fear, all human limitation, that my life could not, and joyfully would not, ever go back to what it had been before this sacred encounter. I had journeyed to the very edge of eternity, to the heart of divine love, and had been graciously, miraculously permitted to return, not just with my physical life unexpectedly, undeservedly restored, but with a sacred, life-altering, world-changing purpose. The ongoing, daily struggle was no longer primarily about my own personal survival, my own fleeting happiness, or my own worldly achievements. It was now, and would forever be, about how to faithfully, effectively, courageously, and lovingly bear the precious, transformative, healing light I had been so mercifully, so generously, so divinely shown. The path ahead was shrouded in much human uncertainty, fraught with potential misunderstanding, resistance, and even outright ridicule from a world still largely asleep to these profound spiritual realities. But I was not afraid, not anymore, for I had his unequivocal, eternal promise echoing joyfully, powerfully, ceaselessly within my transformed heart. I will be with you, always. And that, I knew with every fiber of my resurrected being, was more than enough. It was everything. My physical recovery progressed, inch by painful inch, but the internal spiritual transformation was far more swift and profound, a seismic shift in the very bedrock of my being. The Julian who had been primarily defined by his career, his relationships, and his understandable but ultimately limiting human perspective, was slowly, irrevocably, joyfully being reborn as someone new, someone whose core identity was no longer forged in the crucible of worldly experience alone, but in the luminous, unconditional, all-encompassing love of the divine. The decision to reorient my life, to place the sharing of this sacred message at the very center of my existence, was not a conscious, intellectual choice made after careful deliberation. It was an organic, irresistible unfolding, a natural consequence of the profound spiritual awakening I had undergone. The things that had once seemed so important, career advancement, societal approval, material comforts, now felt secondary, almost trivial, when weighed against the immeasurable significance of the truths I had been shown and the urgent need to share them with a world starving for authentic spiritual nourishment. My new mission, the one he had so lovingly entrusted to me, in that realm of ineffable light, began tentatively, informally, almost shyly at first. I started by sharing my story, my complete, unvarnished testimony, with small, intimate groups, with anyone who exhibited a genuine, heartfelt willingness to listen with an open mind and a searching spirit. These were often individuals already on their own spiritual quests, people in recovery groups, attendees at inclusive spiritual retreats, members of LGBTQ+ support circles, where the hunger for a message of divine acceptance was particularly acute. I spoke not as a preacher, for I claimed no theological expertise, nor as a guru, for I sought no followers, but simply, humbly, vulnerably, as a witness, a man who had journeyed to the brink of eternity, who had been embraced by infinite love, and who had been graciously brought back with a message not of his own making, but for the healing of all. I recounted my NDE in as much detail as my human language could manage, striving to convey the ineffable beauty and transformative power of the experience, the terrifying initial darkness, the sudden, glorious, all-consuming advent of the divine light, the overwhelming, indescribable, soul-healing love of the central divine figure, God, the panoramic, deeply personal, and ultimately liberating life review with its painful and joyful revelations, and the profound, paradigm-shattering insights he had shared about the true, universal nature of existence, the illusory nature of human condemnation, the unseen spiritual forces at play in our world, and the absolute, unyielding imperative of unconditional love as the guiding principle of all truly spiritual life. I spoke, with a newfound conviction that often surprised even myself, of the urgent, pressing need for humanity to lay down the insidious, self-destructive weapons of hatred, resentment, prejudice, fear, and judgment that we carry so carelessly, so habitually, so destructively within our own hearts, long before we ever consider picking up any form of physical weapon or uttering a word of condemnation against another. The reactions to my deeply personal and unconventional testimony were, as he had gently forewarned, incredibly varied and often profoundly unpredictable. Some listeners were visibly, deeply moved, tears of recognition, relief, and hope streaming down their faces, their souls palpably touched by the message, recognizing in my faltering words a deep, unspoken truth that resonated powerfully with their own innermost spiritual yearnings, their own painful questions, their own desperate search for meaning, acceptance, and authentic connection with the divine. They asked earnest, searching, often poignant questions, shared their own personal stories of spiritual struggle, their own experiences of feeling judged or excluded by traditional religion, their own hunger for a more loving, inclusive understanding of God. For these individuals, my story seemed to serve as a powerful confirmation of their own intuitive spiritual sense, a tangible beacon of hope and validation in a world that often felt spiritually barren, judgmental, or confusing. Others, predictably, and often with a well-meaning concern that masked their own discomfort or disbelief, remained deeply skeptical, their minds unable, or perhaps unwilling to stretch beyond the confines of their established, conventional, materialistic worldview. They politely, sometimes awkwardly, attributed my extraordinary experience to the known and documented psychological and physiological effects of severe physical trauma, to the well-researched consequences of temporary oxygen deprivation to the brain during my period of clinical death, or to the mind's undeniably powerful, almost magical, capacity to construct elaborate, comforting fantasies or hallucinations when under extreme, life-threatening duress. I met their skepticism not with defensiveness, argument, or any attempt at coercive persuasion, for I knew with certainty that intellectual debate alone could not impart the kind of direct, heart-centered knowledge I had been so privileged to receive, but rather with the same gentle patience, the same unconditional positive regard, and the same loving understanding that he had so generously, so healingly, shown to me. I couldn't force belief. I could only humbly, authentically offer my testimony as a seed, plant it with sincere love and genuine respect for their own journey, and trust that the inherent, luminous truth embedded within the message itself would, in its own divinely appointed time and way, find its own path to the fertile, receptive ground of seeking hearts. Some of the most impactful, deeply moving, and mutually healing conversations I had during this initial period of sharing were with other members of the LGBTQ+ community, men and women who, like me, had so often felt alienated, condemned, or spiritually wounded by the exclusionary, judgmental doctrines and attitudes prevalent in many mainstream religious institutions. They understood, with an almost visceral empathy, the profound pain of spiritual rejection, the deep soul ache of being told that their love was sinful, their very being somehow flawed in the eyes of God. For many of these individuals, my message of God's unconditional, all-embracing love and divine acceptance of them, exactly as they were, was not just comforting, it was life-altering, soul-liberating, a spiritual homecoming they had longed for, often despaired of ever finding. I certainly didn't possess all the answers to life's profound mysteries, nor did I ever pretend to. My own understanding of the vast, multifaceted spiritual truths I had been privileged to glimpse was still evolving, deepening, and expanding with each passing day, with each new heartfelt conversation, with each quiet moment of prayerful reflection. But I held fast, with an unshakable, joyful grip, to the luminous, transformative core of his divine message. Unconditional love is the ultimate, foundational reality of all existence, the most powerful, creative, redemptive, and healing force in the entire universe. Radical forgiveness, for ourselves as much as, if not more than, for others, is absolutely essential to break the heavy chains of past pain, lingering resentment, and self-sabotaging patterns, allowing the soul to move forward into greater freedom and joy. True, lasting peace, the peace that surpasses all human understanding and worldly circumstance, begins not in grand international treaties or societal reforms, however important those may be, but silently, sacredly, powerfully, within the newly consecrated, transformed landscape of the individual human heart. Every single soul, without any exception, is infinitely precious, a beloved, unique, and irreplaceable child of the divine, intrinsically interconnected in a vast, intricate, luminous web of spiritual kinship. I discovered, with a growing sense of wonder and gratitude, that the most powerful and effective way to convey this life-changing, world-healing message was not through eloquent rhetoric, sophisticated theological arguments, or displays of charismatic spiritual authority, but by striving, however imperfectly, however humbly, to simply embody, to authentically live, the very unconditional love, the profound inner peace, and the boundless divine compassion I had so overwhelmingly, so unforgettably experienced in His holy presence. It was in genuinely, actively listening to others, with an open, empathetic, non-judgmental heart, especially to those who felt unheard, unseen, or unloved. It was in courageously speaking my truth, His truth, with honesty, humility, vulnerability, and unwavering conviction, even when it was uncomfortable or unpopular. It was in consciously, consistently making the effort to see, acknowledge, and honor the divine spark, the inherent sacred worth, within everyone I met, even, and perhaps most importantly, in those who disagreed with me, misunderstood me, judged me, or treated me with hostility or contempt. My life's purpose was no longer primarily about fighting external battles for recognition or acceptance, nor was it about achieving personal worldly success or fleeting happiness. It was now joyfully, wholeheartedly dedicated to contributing, in whatever small, humble, divinely guided way I could, to the desperately needed growth of unconditional love, profound wisdom, spiritual healing, and compassionate understanding in a fractured, fearful, and suffering world. The primary battlefield had definitively, irrevocably shifted from the often hostile external landscapes of societal prejudice and religious intolerance to the infinitely more challenging, yet ultimately far more rewarding, and eternally significant, sacred landscape of the individual human heart, beginning with my own. The mission He had given me was far more difficult, far more nuanced, far more demanding of my entire being than any earthly design project I had ever undertaken, yet it was also, by an infinite measure, infinitely more rewarding, more fulfilling, and more profoundly aligned with the deepest, truest, most sacred longings of my resurrected soul. As I continue this unexpected, divinely appointed, often surprising and always humbling journey, I recall His comforting, empowering words with ever-increasing frequency and gratitude. Speak what you have seen, what you have felt, what you now know. The words will be given to you when they are needed. And they are, consistently, miraculously, often flowing through me with a wisdom and a grace that I know are not my own. Each time I summon the courage to share my story, to bear witness to the inclusive, liberating truth, He revealed I feel His unmistakable, loving presence, a quiet, inner strength, a gentle, unerring guidance, a profound, joyful confirmation that I am not, and never will be, alone in this sacred, life-giving endeavor. The lingering fear of ridicule, of rejection, of misunderstanding has largely, almost completely, faded, replaced by an urgent, burning, passionate desire to share the boundless hope, the profound healing, and the transformative, unconditional love I was so freely, so undeservedly, so divinely given. My entire life, in its entirety, is now, and will forever be, a living testament to the undeniable, glorious fact that profound, radical, spiritual transformation is possible for absolutely anyone, regardless of their past, their identity, their beliefs, or their perceived failings. It is a testament that even from the deepest, darkest, most painful depths of societal rejection, religious wounding, personal despair, and spiritual ignorance, the eternal, invincible, all-healing light can and will emerge, if only we are willing to open our hearts to its presence. It is a testament that divine love is, indeed, infinitely stronger than death, immeasurably stronger than hatred, unutterably stronger than all the combined forces of fear and darkness in all of creation. And to you, my dear friend, who are listening to or reading this story now, perhaps you too are searching for something more, something deeper, something truer. Perhaps you carry your own hidden wounds, your own unanswered, aching questions, your own deep, often unspoken, longings for meaning, for purpose, for unconditional acceptance, for authentic spiritual connection. His divine message of boundless love, of infinite hope, of complete healing, is for you as well, right here, right now, in this very moment. Know this in the deepest core of your being. You are loved, unconditionally, infinitely, exactly as you are, without reservation, without exception. You are invited, in this very breath, to seek the eternal, indwelling light that resides patiently, lovingly, within the sacred, holy space of your own precious heart. You are infinitely empowered, by the very grace of your existence, to consciously choose expansive, life-affirming love over constricting, soul-diminishing fear, to choose divine, healing compassion over human, wounding judgment, to choose liberating, joyful forgiveness over bitter, imprisoning resentment, to choose sacred, harmonious unity over illusory, painful separation. The divine power to transform your own life, and by that very transformation, to contribute significantly to the healing and upliftment of the entire world, resides palpably, powerfully, accessibly within each and every one of us. It begins not with grand outward gestures, but with a single, simple, conscious choice, a courageous, heartfelt turning of the heart towards the divine source of all love, all life, all truth. My journey, from the depths of physical death and spiritual confusion to the heights of divine encounter and liberating truth, has taught me, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that authentic, transformative faith is not, and was never meant to be, an escape from the complexities, the challenges, and the often painful realities of the world. Rather, it is a divine, grace-filled means to engage with life more deeply, more lovingly, more courageously, more effectively, and more joyfully. It is not about blind adherence to rigid, human-made dogma or the performance of empty, lifeless ritual. It is, and always has been, about cultivating a living, breathing, dynamic, intimate, and uniquely personal relationship with the divine, with God, with love itself. I was once a man who felt defined by his profession and his identity, in a world that often misunderstood both. But he, in his infinite wisdom, boundless compassion, and overwhelming mercy, has called me, and is lovingly, urgently calling all of us, regardless of who we are or what we have done, to become his messengers of peace, his warriors of light, his conduits of healing, spiritual activists armed not with weapons of division or doctrines of condemnation, but with the invincible, irresistible power of a transformed, unconditionally loving heart, a compelling, authentic story of redemption, a universal message of eternal hope, and a living, breathing, joyful testament to the enduring, all-conquering, all-embracing power of divine, unconditional love. And that, I now know with every fiber of my resurrected, reconsecrated being, is a sacred, glorious mission. I will joyfully, faithfully, and gratefully serve for all the rest of my earthly days and into the boundless, luminous expanse of eternity.